Welcome to Into the Night. I'm Nari, your guide on today's excursion down a twisted path. Be careful not to get lost. Be it dark or light, it's easy to lose your way. Are you ready? Then let's begin. The Desert Drifter. A hot wind blew across the desert landscape. July was always hot in southern Arizona, but this one seemed unusually torturous. Clouds to the west teased an expectation of rain as darkening clouds cast shadows on the Tucson mountains. How many days had it been since the last time there had been more than just enough to settle the dust? Weeks? Months? Velma Atchison had lost count. Still, this land rooted her in place. It was harsh. It was uncompromising. Hell, at times it was downright dangerous. Some of the people were too. The wind picked up, and the Ocotillos danced. Maybe the rain would happen. Maybe it wouldn't. At this point in her life, Velma had stopped counting on much. Too many hard lessons and unanswered questions left her devoid of hope. That didn't stop her from watching the horizon, morning and night, hoping to see the familiar silhouette of Chance Bostic. A flicker of anticipation flashed through her eyes. Foolish as it seemed, the only hope she clung to rested on seeing Chance again. He'd come home. He'd promised to. The distinct smell of creosote wafted on the wind, rushing from the storm's outflow as the gray haze of rain pelted the mountainside in the distance. Velma could taste the creosote. So strong was the odor that promised rain would reach her ranch. Nothing smelled like the scent of the desert plant when it rained. She felt weary, but the smell was invigorating. For far too long, Velma had tasted salty tears more often than she had the cleansing rains the summer storms produced. She waited, sometimes patiently, and sometimes angrily, but she waited. The weeks she spent with Chance were too real, too incredibly heartfelt, to not keep the faith that he would return. She'd first seen Chance when she and her father went into town to buy supplies. They'd stopped at the mercantile to pick up enough of the basics to get them by. And there he stood, 6 feet 5 inches of rugged man. She hadn't meant to stare, but she did. "Ma'am?" He leaned over the counter to get the clerk's attention.
"Yes, can I help you?"
"I'd like 25 cents worth of gumdrops, please." Velma gasped as she watched the clerk fill a bag with the candy treats. She'd never seen a man waste so much money on something so trivial. Maybe he had children. A lot of children. That meant he was married, and she needed to stop staring at him right now. But no. The man walked around the store, looking at tack and farm supplies, eating every one of those gumdrops. Velma told herself she should be horrified at the wanton avarice of a man eating that much candy with no care for anyone but himself. Instead, an overwhelming sense of relief and excitement swept over her as she told herself he must be single. Just as Velma considered how to approach this stroke of luck, her thoughts were interrupted. "Howdy, ma'am." The two locked eyes. For a moment, he even stopped chewing his sticky treat. "Hello." Velma felt her knees wobble. "Would you care for one of these? I'm afraid I've about made myself sick with them." She couldn't turn down any reason to continue talking to this man. He was more appealing than any sugary morsel.
"Why, yes, thank you."
He tipped the bag to its side so she could peer into it. Velma, at 5'8", had never considered herself short, but his height caused her to feel downright dainty in his presence. Going on her tiptoes, she took a look at the candies. "Go ahead, take a handful. I guess my eyes were bigger than my stomach. I've got a terrible sweet tooth, and the whole time I've been on the cattle drive, I couldn't think of anything else than eating a bag of these. Now I realize I may have been too greedy. Please, do me a favor and take a handful." So she did. Velma had a weakness for sweets herself. Her frugal nature, however, kept her from spending money on such things.
Thank you for being so kind. I haven't had one of these in ages.
I'll be disappointed if you don't take a bunch of them off my hands. Velma giggled. It wasn't something she did often. Suddenly, her father, distressed by the unusual sound of her glee, appeared at her side. Just what's going on here?
Father.
Jeb Acheson glared at his daughter, cutting her off. He then stared intently at the dusty man, holding a bag of candy. Unshaken, the newcomer extended his hand. Sir, I'm Chance Bostic. I just arrived in town on a cattle drive. I'm coming back from Texas. I'm from Yuma, and it's nice to be back in a familiar desert. It's a pleasure to meet you. Surprised by Chance's friendly nature, Jeb slowly reached out to shake the young man's hand. I'm Jeb Acheson. I see you've met my daughter. Jeb's eyes narrowed. Yes, I have, but I haven't had the pleasure of learning her name yet. Velma. It's Velma Acheson. Jeb's tone of voice sounded more threatening than cordial. Miss Velma, it's nice to meet you. I'm Chance. I decided to go on the cattle drive to see some sights. It looks like I have. Velma's face reddened. So did Jeb's, but his was out of anger, not embarrassment. Sir, you need to watch your smart mouth. I apologize, Mr. Acheson. I've just never met a girl as beautiful as Velma, and I've never been one to not speak my mind. I'm sorry if I was too forward. His eyes met Velma's. Kindly tell me why you were talking with my daughter. I heard her laughter all the way across the store, and it wasn't fitting. Velma isn't the laughing type. Sir, if you'd give me permission, I'd like to court your daughter. Shocked, Velma and Jeb were speechless. Velma didn't have any callers, and Jeb had begun to think he was raising a spinster. She was, after all, 19. If they'd been the religious type, he might have sent her off to a convent like his cousin, Mary Catherine, had done. Jeb Acheson wasn't exactly a pew-on-Sunday morning kind of man, however. He was too practical for that. He had a ranch to run, and a daughter to raise by himself. Sir, is that a yes? Chance's deep voice brought Jeb out of his trance. Yes, I suppose. That began their courtship. Chance proved Jeb Acheson wrong. Velma was the laughing type. She couldn't resist his quick wit. He brought out a part of her she hadn't even known she'd had. In the middle of an arid desert, love bloomed. They were happy, and happiness wasn't something either of them was accustomed to. Chance had been on his own for a while. His mother died in childbirth when he was 7, and his father took off on a business trip and never returned when Chance was 15. For the first time, they both sensed they'd found something permanent. Velma, you know I've got that cattle drive coming up next week. I hate leaving you, but I need the money.
I wish you wouldn't leave, but I know you have to do this.
A tear trickled down her cheek. Chance softly wiped it away. I'll be back. I promise. Will you promise me something?
What's that?
I know I don't have a lot to offer you, but will you marry me when I get back? I'll ask your pa's permission. I just want to hear it from you.
Yes, I will marry you, Chance Bostic.
Chance lived up to his word and asked her father for her hand. Jeb hesitated and grumbled, but finally agreed. He didn't want to deny Velma what could be her only chance at marriage. She couldn't live with him on the ranch forever. The next week, both Velma and Chance had tears in their eyes as he rode off to join one last cattle drive before settling down. Chance's mind was made up to use the money to buy Velma a ring. His ma had never had one, and that pained her. Her sadness over it was one of his clearest memories of her. He was going to make sure Velma never felt that disappointment. In another 4 weeks he'd return, and they could make their love official. Velma occupied herself during the next month by planning a wedding and making arrangements to set up her own household. She'd dreamed of this her entire life. She nearly floated on air as she went about her days. Jeb Atchison wasn't nearly as jubilant. He still had doubts about that no-account cowhand who had come to town, making his daughter all kinds of promises. When 4 weeks dragged into 5, Velma's joy was replaced by fear. As 5 weeks dragged into 6, 7, and 8, fear became terror. Why wasn't Chance returning? Jeb had the answer. "He's not coming back, Velma. He was nothing but a drifter. I knew he was no good the first time I saw him, thinking he was so funny and making a fool of you at the mercantile." His words stabbed her as much as the heartbreak of Chance's absence. So she waited, and waited. Jeb continued to tell her how Chance was nothing but a drifter who'd never meant any of the things he'd said to her. "I just hope you're still a reputable woman." How could he say such a thing to his daughter? To Jeb's dismay, Velma never courted another man. His fears of her living with him on the ranch forever were coming true. Velma's thoughts returned to the present. The strong smell of wet creosote and the sound of pounding rain called her back to the scene playing out before her. There was no silhouette of Chance Bostic on the horizon. There hadn't been, and there wouldn't be. 3 bad men and a 10-inch blade made certain he wouldn't return to Velma. In her heart, she believed he loved her. She knew she loved him. 100 years hadn't changed that. Eternity wouldn't change that. Velma passed back through the closed doorway. She would walk among the desert landscape she loved once the rain stopped. Her earthly ties no longer bound her as she floated through her father's ranch house that had long ago been abandoned. Velma embraced her existence as an eternal desert drifter. Thank you for joining me for Into the Night, an anthology series written by Caroline Giammanco, narrated and produced by Nari Kwak, with music created by Alex Sexton, theme music by Nico Rodriguez. Our links are in the show notes. Into the Night is available on your favorite podcast directory, so be sure to subscribe and follow so you never miss an episode. We would really appreciate a 5-star review, as it helps new excursionists to find and join us. Feel free to share with someone you want to bring along on our next excursion. I'd love to hear from you on Twitter at Into the Night Pod or by email at itnanthology@gmail.com. I'll see you next time, and remember, whether in the shadows or in the daylight, all twisted paths lead you into the night.